so that it's not connected. Look at the studies. They're all for one vaccine, the MMR. Now, there was autism. We already started seeing autism back in the 80s, before VICA was passed. The reason VICA was passed was so many kids, the DBT vaccine, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, was introduced in the late 70s, early 80s, and we started seeing a dramatic rise in SIDS and autism. People started suing the vaccine companies. They went to Congress and said, we're going to stop making vaccines unless you give us full immunity from liability. And instead of leaving that liability in place like it is for every other industry and letting market forces give us safer vaccines, Congress gave them immunity. So now there's zero incentive with them making the vaccine safer. But in exchange for giving them that immunity, Congress ordered CDC to do studies on the DBT vaccine and autism. And in 1994, and the HHS appointed the Institute of Medicine as the ultimate arbiter of vaccine safety science. So when you talk to somebody who's a proponent of vaccines, they'll never cite you as scientific studies. They'll cite you, they rely on what we call appeals to authority. They'll say, well, vaccines are safe because CDC says they're safe. WHO says they're safe. NIH says it's safe. FDA says they're safe. My doctor told me they were safe. That's called an appeal to authority. It's a debating trick. It's not science. What your doctor tells you is not science. What CDC says is not science. Science is what is in peer-reviewed publication that appears on PubMed. And HHS said CDC is not in charge of interpreting the science, nor is NIH or FDA. The Institute of Medicine, we are going to appoint and contract to review the science. And what does the Institute of Medicine say? In 1991, 1994, 2011, and 2014, the Institute of Medicine did reviews, comprehensive reviews of all vaccine safety science. And what do they conclude? That CDC had never done its job to study the DPT vaccine, or the hepatitis B vaccine, or hepatitis A, or the Hib vaccine, or any of the other vaccines except for MMR. And we know what they did with the MMR studies. They're fixed epidemiological studies. They never did what IOM told them to do, which is to do toxicology studies, to do clinical studies, to do animal studies, to do pharmacological studies, to do mechanistic studies. They never did any of those. They did epidemiological studies, which are notoriously easy to fix. In my racket, which is environmental law, we have a saying, which is that statistics don't lie, but the statisticians do. And the statisticians are the ones who created the MMR. There's another saying, that epidemiological studies are like prisoners of war. You can torture them to say anything you want them to say. And that's why they use epidemiological studies and any of the other studies that the Institute of Medicine told them to do. And we know what we're left with now, which is an industry that is now dominating the press. So here's the math. The industry now makes almost $50 billion a year and $550 billion on the back end. And what do they do with that money? They spend $25 billion of it. Half of the money that they make on those vaccines every year, the pharmaceutical industry gives to the American press. And that's why you don't see any reporting about the science Or every week we see new scientific studies coming out, real ones. Animal studies, clinical studies. Studies by Chris Shaw, by Chris Exley, by Louis Lujan, by some of the greatest scientists in the world who are out there actually doing science, and they're saying there is a big problem here. And what is the solution of the industry and the press? It is to abolish vaccine injury by fiat, by simply declaring it does not exist. And anybody who talks about it has to be silenced, because they're dangerous people. And their words are dangerous. And if there's pictures of children who have been injured by vaccines that appear on the internet, they need to be removed. They cannot be shared. This information must be kept under wraps because it spreads like a virus. But all of you know, raise your hand in this audience if you have a relative who had a vaccine injury. Virtually everybody raised their hand. Vaccine, so they call us all anti-vax because that's a way of shutting people up. It's another word. By calling us names, they can censor us. It's like what they did in the old days when they were burning witches. They said they're dangerous. What they say is dangerous. They must be silenced. They must be burned. They cannot be debated. They cannot be spoken to. And that's what they have to do here. They have to silence us. And we all know that the vaccine, that the people who are part of this movement, who are vaccine hesitant, are people, are almost all of them, are the mothers and fathers of children with intellectual disabilities. And they believed in vaccines. And they got their children vaccinated. And they paid a price. And now they don't want to give another vaccine to that child who was injured.
Okay?
And they're frightened to give a vaccine to the younger brother or the younger sister because they think that they may have a genetic vulnerability. And it's not because of the spread of some dangerous ideology. It's because those mothers and those fathers are motivated to go look at the science, to go to PubMed, to go beneath what the media is telling them, to go beyond what the CDC is saying and what their doctors are saying, and to go actually to the science and read the science. And, you know, they say, well, we're going to censor now. And this morning I was very disappointed because Twitter, which originally resisted the political demand that they began censoring all this information, today agreed to start censoring itself. So, and of course the reason that they're censoring, they're saying because it's vaccine misinformation. Vaccine misinformation. Oh, but if you really want to hear vaccine misinformation, go to the mainstream media. How many are... By vaccine misinformation, what they really mean is somebody who is skeptical about what they're being told by this $50 billion industry. And if these people are trading science, GreenMed Info, Children's Health Defense, my group, virtually every statement on our website is supported by peer-reviewed science. Have you ever seen peer-reviewed science cited on NBC or CNN or ABC? You will never see it. What you will see are long advertisements for branded diseases and fear of them saying you better get your flu shot because guess what? 80,000 people died of flu last year. And you heard that again. How many of you heard 80,000 people died of flu? And you know how many really died? According to the CDC, 2,300, and only about 20 of those were actually verified by blood tests. So at most it's 2,300, but they need to tell you it's 80,000 to make it sound like a terrifying epidemic so they can sell more of their products. They're getting $25 billion a year from pharma, and pharma is now dictating content. And it's telling them what they can and cannot say on their news reports. And it's telling them that whenever we have a flu season, you need to do a certain number of hours every week, scaring the heck out of every American that the flu is going to kill them. So you lie about it. That's vaccine misinformation. It's just a lie. And many of you may have seen, how many of you heard on the mainstream media that 1 in 1,000 people dies from measles? How much, if you go to actually CDC's mortality and morbidity data, what do they say? And at the last time we had measles, it was killing 1 out of every 500,000 Americans. Not 1 in 1,000, 1 in every 500,000 Americans. 400 people died of measles in 1964, and almost all of them were people who were either malnourished, so they didn't have vitamin A, or they weren't, their mothers were not breastfeeding because Nestle's and some of the food companies came up with synthetic breast milk, or their own commercial breast milk and baby formula, and they said to American mothers, this is better than your breast milk, so stop breastfeeding. Well, a lot of people in the 50s and early 60s did that, and according to the science, a disproportionate number of those 400 kids were kids who were not getting breast milk, and most of the rest of them were kids who were malnourished. These are the misinformation. Now, Lester Holt, who is NBC, his show is sponsored by Merck. Dell got in a scandal because he raised $1.5 million.
Sorry. I apologize.
I'm ashamed of you, Dell. And Lester Holt, who reported this with great glee, is getting hundreds of millions of dollars from Merck. And, they don't know. Dell got his money. They said, where did you get it from? Who is the evil, sinister force who wrote you that check? Dell said, actually, it was like thousands of mothers and doctors and scientists. But Lester Holt gets all his money from one guy, Mr. Merck. And Merck tells him what to say. So when they need a measles outbreak, he says, beware of vaccine misinformation. And he holds up a photo of a baby terribly infected by lesions all over his body. This is what measles is going to do to your baby, says Lester Holt. It turns out they couldn't find a picture of a baby with measles. They took a picture of a healthy baby and they painted red dots all over him. Did they apologize for that? Is that a national scandal? Yeah. What they want to report on, what Lester Holt wants to report on, is Del Bigtree is raising money. So I want to thank all of you for what you're doing, for showing up here. We are building an army. We are not going to let them take your children. I want you all to follow me on Instagram, support ICANN, support Children's Health Defense. All of these companies, I always say that there's a huge cognitive dissonance about this movement, about what they're saying. The reason they can't talk about this is the stuff they're trying to get us to swallow is so weird and bizarre. They say, well, the CDC says, whatever you do, don't let a mother eat fish when she's pregnant because it's got mercury in it. But then they're recommending mercury today. Mercury preserved flu vaccines, not with trace amounts.
And tetanus.
Trace amounts is less than 1 microgram.
Yeah, directly.
The mercury-based flu vaccines, a third of flu vaccines have mercury in them. Not 1 microgram, not 2, not 3, but 25 micrograms. And they're recommending them for 6-month-old children, for children in every year of life, and for pregnant women in any trimester of pregnancy. So they're telling the woman, don't eat fish because it's got mercury in it. They're saying, take this flu vaccine, which FDA has refused to approve it. They've refused to license it for women. It's an off-label use. FDA is not even going along with this and saying, yeah, it's safe. They're saying, when we call them and say, how do you let this happen? They say to us, we didn't license it. You need to talk to CDC. CDC is getting on the label of thimerosal. It says it causes birth defects in mammals. Do they not know that human beings are mammals? So, they tell a woman, don't eat the mercury when you're pregnant. It's okay to get a shot. That's called cognitive dissonance. The Democrats who are leading this, I'm so ashamed of my party, are saying, you know what? We know the pharmaceutical companies are crooked, that they're homicidal, that they're greedy. And all four of the four pharmaceutical companies who make all 72 of the vaccines that are now mandated for American children, every one of them is a convicted felon. In the last 10 years, collectively, those 4 companies have paid $35 billion in penalties for falsifying science, for defrauding regulators, for bribing doctors, or using intimidation and extortion and lying to the government about all of their other medical products. And the Democrats on Capitol Hill and in the state capitol here will tell you, yeah, these are the worst companies in the world, except when it comes to vaccines. They found Jesus there, and they're not going to lie to us about vaccines to make money. Oh, they tell us that, the Democrats, for many years. We have been fighting for my body, my choice. Whatever happened to that? Whatever happened to let's start listening to women? Let's start standing up to the bullies. Bullies who are beating up on these women and who are hurting them. Well, guess what? Merck is a bully, Sanofi's a bully, Glaxo's a bully, GSK, Merck, who am I missing? Pfizer is a bully. And those are the bullies that we cannot stand up to. Oh, the Democratic Party needs to start listening to women, not to pharma. They need to start going back to their own ideals, which is my body, my choice. The biggest threat to this country, the Democrats have always said, are the big corporations who can overwhelm democracy. And yet they're telling these corporations, we are going to go out and we're going to help you censor criticism of your pharmaceutical products. And not only that, we're going to force the American children to take your products, even though none of them have been safety tested. Everybody knows that vaccines are immune from liability from litigation. And most people don't know that they also have an exemption against safety testing. Every other pharmaceutical product and medical product in this country has to be safety tested against an inert placebo. There's not one of the 72 vaccines that are now mandated for our children that has ever been tested against an inert placebo. That means that we don't know what the risk profile is of any of those products. That means that nobody can tell you if they are science or evidence-based. If they believe in empiricism, if they believe in a rational universe, they cannot tell you That vaccine is going to prevent more deaths and injuries than it's going to cause. It is simply impossible for them to tell you that until they have been placebo tested. And yet they are taking this product, mandating it for our children, and then they are shutting up and silencing anybody who whines about it. This is not the democracy that my family stood for. It is not the democracy that I grew up with. And it is the democracy that we have to fight. The American Revolution began with a very small group of people. And we need a new American Revolution in this country, and it's going to start right here. Thank you very much.